Shalom, Baruchim Habayim. Welcome to Sheva'im Pani LaTorah, to 70 Faces of the Torah, and also Sulam Yaakov. This week's Torah portion is Parashat Ki Tisa, which means when you raise up or when you elevate. I know in many translations of that Hebrew phrase Ki Tisa, it's translated as when you take a census. However, that's not an accurate translation due to what the Hebrew says, which deals with the elevation of the actual spiritual head of Israel. Okay, I have subtitled this teaching, Everything is for the Good, or as it says in Hebrew, Gamzu Letova. Everything is for the good. Now, before we begin and get into the details of this week's Torah portion, I'd also like to mention to everybody a special class that we have coming up in relation to Pesach. And this class is specifically designed and to deal with a topic for those who come from Christian or Messianic backgrounds, and that is dealing with the Passover lamb. And this is a special live 2-day teaching, as you see there on your screen, starting on Motzi Shabbat, Saturday night, March 29th, and going into Sunday morning, March 30th. So for everyone who donates a $150 donation, you'll be able to receive access to this class. We have a QR code there that you can scan via your phone if you want to pause the video, or you can head over to our website, click the link down in the video description. If you want more information, you can email us. And for those of you that know, when I was active as a Messianic rabbi in Canada, this was a topic that I taught upon that sent a lot of shockwaves through the Messianic Jewish community, because it challenged the understanding, the Christian understanding of what is the Passover lamb. There was a few attempts for some people to speak out, however, nothing that was able to debunk or to refute anything I taught. And so since then, I have continuously built onto that subject matter, putting it into proper context. And for those that were a part of our class before, we put a book together on this as well. And so for those that are interested, once again, you can scan the QR code, go over to the website. If you have any questions, please feel free to email us as well. So let us digress back here to the teaching for this week in Parashat Ki Tisa. Parashat Ki Tisa is mostly known for the tragic event that happens with the Chet HaEgel, which is the sin of the golden calf. And so for many times when we read about the Chet HaEgel, many times we wonder, how could the children of Israel allow themselves to behave in such an immoral manner, especially after they experience the divine presence of Hashem on Har Sinai? How is it possible for them to make such a foolish mistake? So what I would like to do is to delineate to the words of Rav Yehuda Halevi, known as the Kuzari, and he brought down in his book, which is titled The Kuzari, in which he was having a conversation with the king of Khuzar, who eventually became interested in converting to Judaism. And in this conversation, when the king asks Rav Yehuda Halevi that if Israel are truly the chosen people of God, then how is it possible for them that after they experience the miraculous intervention of Hashem regarding Yetziat Mitzrayim, the Shekhinah upon Har Sinai with Kabbalat HaTorah, how is it possible for them to resort to a form of avodah zarah, to idolatry, when it came to the golden calf? And so here in Kuzari, this is in chapter 1, it says over here, Hizaher chaver, translations say be careful, Rabbi, but in the Hebrew, it's actually be careful, friend, that you do not overstate the praise of your people, right? This is the king of Khuzar telling the rabbi, Rav Yehuda Halevi, this, okay? Do not overstate the praise of Shivchei Amacha, of your people, and overlook the well-known account of their rebellion during this period of miracles. For I have heard that in the midst of all of this, that they had actually had Ze Asu Ego. They produced a calf, and not only that, Va'avduhu, they worshipped it instead of Ha'elokim, instead of God himself. Rav Yehudi Halevi responds back, the king then follows up with a question: how could there be any remnant of greatness related to, obviously, the fathers, Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, after this whole debacle with the golden calf, right? So then Rav Yehuda Halevi, he responds and he explains to the king that Israel did not actually commit avodah zarah, right? Flat out idolatry, when they created the golden calf. But rather, they wanted to replace Moshe with something. And so by creating the golden calf, the people believed that a spirit would enter into it and assume the role of the Mishkan for them. And so Rabbi Yehuda Halevi responds, saying over here, he says that Ki ha'omot chulam bazman hachu hayu ovadim zorot. In those days, every people worshipped images. Even the Jews, for the most part, the Midrash tells us that they were just as guilty as the Mitzrayim for avodah zarah. And this is why only also 1/5 of the people of Israel made it out of Mitzrayim, while the other 4/5 they perished, mostly through assimilation. So he says that V'ilu hayu hapilosofim, that even if the philosophers had been able to prove to everyone the existence of the one omnipotent God, they still would not have relinquished their images. This is because they would focus their attentions upon the image and will profess to the masses that divinity attaches itself to the image and that it is unique in some supernatural way. And so he goes on to say that some would attribute their uniqueness, Ze'ah Elokim, directly to God. He then goes on to say, during this period in history, Israel was waiting for that which Moshe had promised to bring down to them from God, something that they could see and focus upon, just as they had focused upon the pillar of cloud and also V'hamu ha'esh, the pillar of fire, b'tzeitam mitzrayim, from when they left out of Mitzrayim. And so, asher hayu mabitim elav, that they would gaze and they would also concentrate upon the pillars and would exalt him by bowing down to God's presence in front of them. They behaved the same way with the pillar of cloud that descended upon Moshe when God spoke with him. So it's very interesting here that what Rav Yehuda Halevi says is very similar to also the words of the Rambam Maimonides when he discusses the significance of why korbanot were introduced. And though, for the record, Rav Yehuda Halevi and the Rambam, they differed a lot in many of their different views upon certain concepts of the Torah, some of their views in explaining the background of why things were introduced the way they were in the Torah is very similar. Like the Rambam will say that the people were accustomed to certain physical things, right? The korbanot, the animals, the Mitzrayim worship them, things of that nature. And so in order to advance or elevate the consciousness of Am Israel, Hashem had to wean them off of it. He had to utilize a system they were familiar with in order to get them to cross over conscientiously from that to finally come to the full realization of who God is. Likewise, what Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is saying to the king Khuzar here is that essentially, because the Israelites were so steeped in the tumah of Avodah Zarah and Mitzrayim, they were used to seeing certain icons and images. And so they made a fatal mistake when they created the Egel Zahav, because in that mistake they believed that the Shekhinah would reside in it, very similar like the way the Shekhinah resided on Moshe. So it's interesting, even when we go back at the end of Rav Yehuda Halevi's quote here, and he says that, God's presence was in front of them and that they behaved the same way with the pillar of cloud. This is fascinating. Okay, the pillar of cloud that descended upon Moshe. So in a way, they're worshiping something physical. This is also why Hashem warned the Jewish people not to make an image. They didn't see anything on Har Sinai, right? When they experienced Kabbalat Torah, there was no physical image. And this is why anything that Hashem commanded regarding the Mishkan, the Kelim, that he showed Moshe in the higher worlds, they were not to deviate from the actual measurements and how the Torah describes the things that the kelim had to be made, because if they added or subtracted from it or attempted to create something identical outside the authority of Moshe, then it is considered idolatry. But in a way, you can also understand this description from Rabbi Yehuda Halevi as if the people were almost guilty of worshiping Moshe as God, right? So before Christianity, with the notion of worshiping a Jew as God, it almost gives the same kind of notion that the people worship Moshe to a degree, and that's not so far-fetched either, because Bnei Israel perceived Moshe, Aharon, and Miriam as demigods to a certain degree. And why I say that is because if you closely study the Torah, when each of them become nifter, when they pass away, with Miriam's death, there's the absence of water, right? The water was given in the merit of Miriam, and it dried up after her death. But when Aharon died, the Torah describes the people mourning a whole month. They sat Shiva for a whole month. And also the Torah's description of Aharon dying before the eyes of the people, it was very shocking and terrifying to them. In a way, the Torah is also trying to portray that when he died, and then the Ani HaKavod, the clouds of glory, also was absent, like the water became absent in the death of Miriam. This is when reality hit the people, that Moshe, Aharon, and Miriam, they're just human beings, just like they are, okay? They're not demigods. And so, yes, to a degree, the people became accustomed, they were assimilated like the Gentiles, in which they worship images, icons. And by, partnering God with something physical, in Hebrew is called shiftuf. There's a permissibility for such a thing amongst non-Jews, but it's not something that's permissible for Jews, unless they did not have the conscientious awareness of what shiftuf is and how it borders on avodah zarah. And then if the job of an individual to rescue such a Jew is to bring them out of that, right? Similar to what Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is saying here, the people had to be weaned off of those former, eras of avodah zarah. And so they made a mistake that in Moshe's absence, that somehow this Egel Zahav would somehow function like a Moshe Rabbeinu or something like a Mishkan. And the reason why I say like a Mishkan, because we have to remember that the command to construct a Mishkan was given prior to the Chet HaEgel. And I explained it numerous times that before the command to build a Mishkan, that command was never about a physical Mishkan. Rather, it was a command to create a dwelling place for the Shekhinah, ve'asu lemikdash ve'shachati betocham, not betochai, but betocham, I will dwell in them. And I've demonstrated in previous teachings by quoting from individuals such as the Sforno, that the actual physical creation of the Mishkan, which also followed, but the Korbanot, these were created physically as a microcosm of man's potential, because they are strictly microcosms, and they only resulted as a result of the Egel Zahav. So Rav Yehuda Halevi mentioned that when the Shekhinah would descend on Moshe, much like it would in the Mishkan, this is why the people were accustomed to worshiping images. That's why I say it's like, in a way, they were worshiping Moshe. They perceived him as a demigod. So since the golden calf was a replacement for Moshe, who really as a Sadiq, really functioned as a Mishkan, an ideal representation of what every Israelite is supposed to look like, the people assumed that the golden calf would function like a Mishkan. The people's fatal error in making this assumption was rooted in their distorted understanding of Hashem. So by assimilating in Mitzrayim, the people applied pagan concepts to their understanding of Hashem, pretty much as I explained before, which is the same way Christianity did when they adopted pagan customs, and eventually they deified a Jew as God and many other things. So one of the main points in this week's Torah portion is Moshe's willingness to intercede on behalf of Israel. He intercedes in a way in where he offers himself to be cut off due to the transgression of the Chet HaEgel. We see here Shemot Exodus 32, verse 32, Moshe, when learning from Hashem that he wants to destroy Israel because of the sin, he jumps in the middle and he says, Ve'ata im Tisa chatatam. And now, if you would raise im Tisa, which is very interesting, it's very similar to ki Tisa, right? Elevate, raise their sin, right? It comes up, the reverberation of the energy that they created in the Egel Zahav is what ascends up into the higher realms. Chatatam, right? Ve'im ein, but if not, look what he says. Macheni na misifrecha asher katafta. Please erase me from your book that you have written. Now, last week I pointed out that Moshe's name was omitted from Parashat Tetzaveh. Why would Moshe's name be omitted, retroactive, when the Chet HaEgel did not take place until Parashat Tisa? Well, one of the main themes in Parashat Tisa, Parashat Tetzaveh, was the Shemen Zait, the crushing of olives to produce oil for the menorah. In fact, if we go back to Exodus 27:20, there we read at the beginning of the Parasha, Ve'ata tetzaveh et bnei Yisrael va'ekhu elecha shemen zait zachatit lamaor laha'laot ner tamid. You shall now command the children of Israel that they shall take for you pure olive oil pressed for illumination to cause the light to ascend eternally or continually, ner tamid. The omission of Moshe's name in Tetzaveh is not just limited to Tetzaveh, which deals with the oil for the menorah and also the big day kehuna, the priestly garments, but Moshe's name is also omitted in Parashat Truma, where the Torah mentions the other various kelim within the Mishkan, such as the Aron, the Ark, the Kaporet, right, the mercy seat of the Ark, the whole Aron HaBarit, the Shulchan Lechem Panim, the table of showbread, the menorah, okay, the courtyard, etc. Moshe's name only appears when the Torah speaks about Machazit HaShekel, the half shekel that appears in Parashat Tisa. We see here in Exodus 30, verse 11 to 12. Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe. Lemor Tisa et rosh bnei Israel lif kudehem. Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, you shall lift up the head of the children of Israel when remembering them. V'natenu ish kofer, nashola Adonai bifkod otam. V'lo yihevahem negev bifkod otam. And therefore every man shall give Hashem an atonement for his soul when remembering them, so that there will not be a plague among them when remembering them. Ze yitno kol haover el hapikudim machazit hashechel. This shall they give. Everyone who passes over to be lifted, to be elevated, a half shekel of the beshekel hakodesh, of the sacred shekel, that is esrin gera, 20 gera, hashekel machazit hashekel, half of a shekel, as was considered truma la Adonai. It's a truma of Hashem. Some translations say a portion of Hashem, but that's not what truma means. I know we're dealing with a lack of vernacular comprehension, English equivalency to Hebrew, but truma is to elevate. It means a room. It means to be lifted up. So it's without coincidence that the last time Moshe's name was mentioned prior to being omitted was at the beginning of Parashat Truma, when it came to taking Truma from the people in preparation of the Mishkan. So we just happen to see the reference to Truma here when it comes to the Machazit Havshechel. But if we go back to Exodus 25, 1 through 2, we see there the name of Moshe, Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe lemor. Daber el bnei Yisrael vayechu li teruma me'et kol ish asher yidvenu libo tichu et terumati. Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, speak to the children of Israel and let them take me as truma. Because in a way, when you properly give to Hashem, this is about a spiritual elevation. One's connection, spiritual proximity to God is what this is about. From every man whose heart motivates him, Nadiv Lev, I would say, his heart inspires him. It's something that comes from within. A person who has a Nadiv Lev is a person who's truly generous, all right? Very generous. And so the person's heart inspires him. From such a person you shall take my truma. Now once again, the word truma, it does not mean portion. It means actually elevate. It's from the root word rum, all right? It means elevate. That's the best way to understand it, but it has nothing to do with a physical elevation. It has to do with a spiritual elevation of one's connection to Hashem. Now, between Truma and Parashat Tisa, when Moshe's name appears, we find a synonym. In Parashat Truma, the subject is Truma, which is to experience elevation, while in Parashat Tisa, the subject is Tisa. Okay? Tisa is from none other than the root nasa, which means to lift up, to elevate as well. And the question here is, what is the connection between these two subjects in relation to the omission and appearance of Moshe's name? Now, considering that Moshe's name was omitted at the command to construct the Mishkan, back in Exodus 25:8, and the meaning of Truma is to be spiritually elevated, we learned that the omission of Moshe in relation to the Mishkan was to teach the people how they can become elevated, how they can become a Mishkan for the Shekhinah. The omission of Moshe's name is about the omission of our individuality. God's presence cannot dwell where the ego lives. It must cease to exist. Now, considering all of these, how do we explain this week's Torah portion when Moshe's name reappears in relation to lifting the people when it comes to the half shekel? Not only that, we discover that wedge between the machazit half shekel and the chet ha'egel, there is the command to construct the kiyor. The kiyor is the water basin that was outside of the temple in the courtyard, adjacent to the altar, the Mizbeach. And this is where the Kohanim, who were performing the avodah, the worship of God, they would go in and they would wash their hands and their feet. And if you were the Kohen Hagadol, like on Yom Kippur, you had a total of 8 garments. And so you were required to wash in between changing your garments from going outside to inside, inside to outside, as it talks about in Parsha Achrei Mot. But you would require to wash. And we read here in this week's Torah portion, Exodus 30, verse 17 through 21, it says, Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe, and here's Moshe's name again, Lemor, saying, Ve'asita kiyor nechoshek ve'chano nechoshek l'raksa ve'natata oto ben ohel moed uven hamizbeach ve'natata shema mayim. Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, you shall make a bronze laver, or kiyor as I like to call it, and its base of bronze. For washing, place it between the ohel moed and the altar, and put water there. And then it goes on to say that from it, V'rachazu Aharon uvana, Aharon and his sons shall wash their hands, mimeno et yedechem ve'et ragleihem, their hands and their feet together. And therefore, whenever they come to the Ohel Moed, which is the sanctuary, the Hechel, they shall wash with water and not die. Or when they approach the altar to serve, to raise up in smoke a fire offering for Hashem. So this deals also with the energy of Tumah, right? Which is impervious to your physical senses, but it's a form of energy. The act of washing, like the act of undergoing Tivila, immersion per se, carries that same type of concept with it, okay? It's the removal of impure energy. So the Torah then concludes as the words, they wash their hands and feet, and therefore velo yamutu, not die. And this shall be, and this is important, right? Because even in the absence of a Mishkan or Beit HaMikdash, the Torah says, v'chayata lehem choch olam. This is an eternal chok, a decree. Therefore, it's for him and for his offspring for their generations. So as long as you have Kohanim alive, they have to abide by this halakha, right? Not coming in contact with Tumat Meit and everything else that can make them tummy, right? To attract the spiritually transmitted diseases, I call it STD. They contract the form of tumor. Now, there's 2 things that we observe about the command to construct the kiyor. One is that it appears completely out of place. What do I mean? Well, the kiyor should have been mentioned back in Parsha Truma, where the other kelim were mentioned with in regards to the Mishkan. Second is when God commands the construction of the kelim, he includes Moshe's name when compared to the Mishkan, and the other kelim where Moshe's name was omitted. So what does this teach us in relation to the chet ha'egel that happens immediately after this passage? So if there was any positive element to the tragic sin of the golden calf, it was Moshe's swift response when punishing those that were accused of avodah zarah. What did Moshe do once he found out about the actual ha'egel? Well, we know he rushed down the mountain, he shattered the luchot, he grinded it into dust, and mixed it with water, and he made the actual sinners of Israel drink the dust with the molten image. And also, not just that, but shattered the actual egel zahav as well. He made them drink it. This method that Moshe did was to probe the extent of guilt of any individual. And this is virtually identical to the method that's used to test a sotah, a woman who is accused of committing infidelity to her husband. The Torah tells us that a sotah was required to drink a potion consisting of the soil, the dirt of the Mishkan, mixed with water that came from the kior. And also, Chazal mentioned that the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu was written on a cloth, a parchment, and dissolved. It was permitted to have it dissolved when normally, halachically, it's prohibited to tear apart anything with the name of Hashem, like a Sefer Torah, that if it's no longer kosher, it's normally you bury it in the ground, okay? But here it's permitted to let it dissolve. And so the woman would then drink it to determine whether she was innocent or guilty. So what we see here is that the kior, it invoked a technique to purge Israel from the sin of the golden calf. And so Moshe's name was associated with the mitzvah of constructing the kior. Why though? It's a very powerful insight when you think about it. Once again, if we go over to Parashat Naso, the Torah tells us that if a husband is suspicious of his wife being unfaithful, of committing infidelity, he has to bring her before the Sanhedrin where she goes through this ritual. And the Torah tells us that the Kohen HaGadol was required to perform the ritual, have her drink it, and if she was guilty, then she would die. But if she was innocent, she would be blessed. So we'll read here the passages for Numbers, Bamidbar 5:23 to 28. And it says here that V'chatav et ha'alot ha'eli ha'kohen b'sefer u'macha lo mei hamarim. The Kohen shall inscribe these curses on a scroll and erase it into the bitter waters, the mei hamarim, okay, like the waters of Merivah, bitter waters. And it says, he shall cause the woman to drink the bitter waters that cause curse. Then the waters that cause curse shall come into her for bitterness. Torah goes on, it says, the Kohen shall take the mincha, the meal offering of jealousy, from the hand of the woman. He shall wave the meal offering before Hashem and shall bring it near the altar. The Kohen shall scoop up from the mincha its remembrance and cause it to go up in smoke on the altar, after which he shall cause the woman at this time to drink the water. Torah then concludes. It says that he shall cause her to drink the water, and it shall be that if she had become defiled and had committed treachery against her husband, the water shall cause a curse, shall come into her for her bitterness, and it says here that her stomach, her womb, shall be distended, and her thighs shall collapse. In other words, her reproductive area, what the Torah is saying here in a very conservative way, her uterus wall, everything shall collapse within her. She will suffer an immediate, excruciating death. And it says, and the woman shall be cursed amid her people. But, the Torah says, V'im lo, if she had not become defiled, she has no tumah, then she is considered tahor, she's pure, and she shall be proven innocent, and therefore her womb is going to be blessed, and she's going to be able to bear zara, she'll be able to conceive a seed, be able to procreate. When Moshe descended from Har Sinai to discover the people guilty of the Chet HaEgel, the Torah says that he became enraged with jealousy. The Torah tells us that because Israel acted like a sotah, Moshe then smashed the Egel Zahav and grounded it into powder, mixing it in water. And what did he do? He caused the Jewish people to drink it like a sotah. We'll go here to Exodus 32:19 through 20. And it says, Vayika asher charav el, hamachaneh vayar et ha'ero, cholot vayichar af Moshe. It happened that as Moses, drew near to the camp, he saw the calf, and also cholot, the debauchery, the dancing, right? Everybody was twerking, they were at the club, they were having a phenomenal time, right? Bachelor party, whatever. But it says when Moshe saw this, vayichar af, he became enraged. And so because of that, vayashlech miyadav, he then basically et haluchot, he threw down the luchot, and they shattered at the actual tachat hahar, the foot of the mountain, literally under the mountain. And so it says that afterwards, vayachar et ha'egel, he took the egel that they had made, asu vayisrof, and burned it ba'ish in the fire. And so he grounded it into a fine powder and sprinkled it vayizar al panei hamayim, over the waters, and therefore vayashke et bnei Israel, and he made the children of Israel to drink it. So what we learn from this is that the reason why Moshe's name is associated with the Kior, even though his name was omitted in regard to the other Kelim of the Mishkan, is that after the Chet HaEgel, Moshe was willing to have his name erased. That's why I mentioned earlier in the prayer, he says, Macheni na misafrecha. Remove me now from your book. Remove me from your Torah for the forgiveness of Israel's sin. In other words, just as Hashem is willing to have his name erased when it comes to Shalom Bayit regarding a husband's suspicion of his wife's infidelity, that she has to go to the Beit Din, and the Kohen takes the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu on a cloth and it dissolves in water. Just as Hashem is willing to allow his name to be erased for the sake of Shalom Bayit, Moshe was also willing to have his name erased. And so the only vessel in the Mishkan that's associated with Moshe's name is the Kior, since it was from the waters of the Kior that Moshe mixed the powder of the golden calf to make the people drink. So what does this have to do with the concept of ki tisa, which is a synonym of truma? We need to know that everything that happens to us in life has the potential to either sink us or cause us to rise. The Torah says at the beginning, ki tisa et rosh b'nei Israel. When the head of the children of Israel is lifted. It doesn't say in Hebrew, Roshe, the heads of the children of Israel. Rosh, head in the singular. When we lift up our head, we are able to see and realize that all the challenges that we face in life are potential for growth. Over at Masechet Barachot, there is a fascinating story of Rabbi Akiva, that upon entering a certain city, there was no available vacancy at any of the hotels. This caused Rabbi Akiva and his disciples to sleep right outside on the outskirts of town, out in the fields. And so, distraught by having to be essentially homeless for the night, Rabbi Akiva told his disciples, Kol de aved rachamana letav aved. Everything that God does in his mercy, he does for our good. Shortly after this, his disciples will come to understand the important words of their rabbi. Let's take a look here at what it says in the Gemara, Masechet Brachot 60b. And it says that when Rabbi Akiva was walking along the road, and he came to a certain city, he inquired about lodging, and they did not give any to him. And he says over here, Kol de aved rachamana letav. Everything that God does, he does for the best. He does for the good. He went and slept in a field. And he had with him, pay attention to this, he had a rooster, he had a chamor, a donkey, and he also had a candle. And it says that a gust of wind came and extinguished the candle. A cat came, like a mountain lion. Don't think like a regular chatul, like a house cat. But a mountain lion came and ate the rooster. And then a lion came and ate the donkey. And so he then wakes up, he sees what happened, and what does he say? Kol de aved rachamana lataf. Everything that God does, he does for the good, for the best. And it says that night an army came and took the city in captivity. Now this time Rabbi Akiva Roman centurions, Roman legions, they were very active in warfare with the Jewish people, especially with many of the zealots in the Galilee region. Okay, and so from the north to the south, they were known for basically pillaging and just executing Jews, especially after Judaism and practices of mitzvah of the Torah were outlawed. So it says that they took the city into captivity, and Roman soldiers at the time, if they found able-bodied men, they would make them slaves, ship them off on a ship from the Mediterranean and send them to Italy, where they would eventually be trained in the Roman army. So it says it turned out that Rabbi Akiva was alone, Rabbi Akiva alone, who was not in the city and had no lit candle, he did not have his rooster, and he didn't have a donkey to give away his location because it didn't bray or make any noises. So it says essentially he was saved. And so he said to his disciples, didn't I tell you that everything that the Holy One, blessed be He does for the best. He does for the good. Rabbi Akiva's story teaches us a very important lesson. Each of us has a chamor, a donkey. We have a rooster and we have a light. Now you might be saying, what? The chamor, it represents our chelik chamore. It's a play on the word chomer. Chomer in Hebrew, it refers to base nature. It represents the coarse physicality of this world that most people gravitate their physical impulses to. Money, materialism, etc. A chamor, which sounds like chomer, is a donkey. And in those days, a donkey was equivalent to, let's say, a pickup truck. You would schlep your goods from point Aleph to point B, right? This is how you would move around, especially if you had a business, whatever the case may be. The donkey was a pickup truck. So depending on how many chamorim you had or how many goods you used to schlep would also kind of determine your prestige and your wealth. So the chamor represents our chomer, our base physical nature. It represents our physical drives towards materialism. Our job in this reality is to harness our inner chamor to fulfill the will of Hashem. Also, each of us has a candle. We have a light that represents our neshama. That is the source of our spiritual existence that is fused in of the chamor, of the body, the chomer. Also, each of us has been given a rooster. The rooster is our discernment. It gives us the ability to discern between light and darkness. Stick with me. In the Siddur, when we get up in the morning and we recite Birchat HaShachar, the morning blessings, there's a blessing in the beginning of the prayer in which we bless Hashem for giving us the ability to discern between day and night. We'll pull the prayer up on the screen. We say, Baruch atah Hashem, blessed are you Hashem, Elokeinu melech haolam, our God, King of the universe, Asher natan lasachvi vina leharchin ben yom uven laila, who gives the heart. Now, this is imposed in the translation, but I'll explain why. Who gives the heart spiritual understanding. Lasachvi vina, to distinguish lehavchin, between ben yom, day, uven laila, and night. Now, most people assume we recite this because we just woke up, right? It's daytime. It's common sense. We know 12 hours for 12 hours of a 24-hour day, 12 hours of daylight, 12 hours of night, right? But it's deeper than that. Over in Sefer Eov, Hashem asks Eov, who placed wisdom in man's inner being and gave discernment to the heart? We find there in Job 38, verse 36. He asks the question, Mishat batuchot chachma o minata lasachvi vina, which is where this prayer is formulated from. Do you know who placed wisdom in the innards, or who imbued the heart with understanding? Lasachvi vina. Now, what's interesting is that the word sichvi, we translate it, and it can mean rooster, But one insight is there to associating the word sichvi with a rooster. All the blessings in Bircha HaShachar are rendered in the present tense, except for the blessing of discernment between day and night. Why? The blessing of Natan L'Sachvi is in the present tense. Why? In his commentary to Sefer Yov, the Gra, the Vilna Gaon, he explained that the past tense usage of Natan L'Sachvi is that it alludes to the first day of creation. Okay? Past tense or present tense, excuse me. It alludes to creation. And this is what the Gra says. I didn't get time to type the Hebrew in. It says, in this blessing, we are referring to the first day of creation as the Holy One, blessed be He, asks Eov, where were you when I founded the earth? And in those verses, the Holy One, blessed be He, elaborates, listing examples of what He created in the beginning. And among the examples we find, Mi natan l'sachvivina, who gave discernment to the rooster. So what the Gra is trying to teach is that Hashem endowed the rooster with a unique type of discernment, one that is lacking in other creatures. Only the rooster recognizes the coming of day. Only the rooster distinguishes the first traces of light. While the rooster derives no benefit from his unique power of discernment, why are we blessing Hashem for endowing the rooster with the gift to discern between day and night? The rooster's gift of discernment benefits us. How? Well, through the rooster's call, which is like an ancient alarm clock, people knew about the coming of the day, when to get up and start working on the farm. Hashem planted within the DNA of the rooster a unique gift to discern the earliest parts of morning, when it's to our physical eyes still black outside. It's actually 72 minutes before sunrise, which is why if you look at the Zman, the halachic times for prayer, like in the morning for Bircha HaShachar, you'll see that it will actually mention everything when the sun's coming on the horizon. 72 minutes before the sunrise, sunlight is the earliest point of prayer in the morning, Aliyat HaShachar, as it's also called. The rooster's ability to discern night from day is so unique that if you were to transplant a rooster from one time zone to another, the rooster will automatically adjust itself to the new time zone and will crow at dawn in its new location. That's fascinating. You know, for us human beings, we get jet lag, right? Send us from one coast to another coast, one time zone to another. And, you know, we got like the cell phone has like multiple like alarms on there. Not the rooster. The rooster is in sync. And so in the blessing, what's fascinating, I want to point out, is that we do not say Hashem gave the rooster the power to livchon, to distinguish, okay, literally examine. Rather, we actually say, lehavchin, to help others to distinguish, to help others to be able to examine. So just as the rooster can automatically adjust to a new time zone, since it's in sync with its location, we recite this prayer to instill within us the awareness that we must be in sync with Hashem at every location of our life. We must be able to discern between the night and the day. And so sometimes, like in the story of Rabbi Akiva, our donkey dies. Our chomer, figuratively speaking, our chomer gets the best of us. Our animal nature, our animal impulse, it gets the best of us. And instead of discerning between light and darkness, we cause the light of our soul to get snuffed out by the darkness. It must be that even in the darkest moments of life, we must develop a spirit of gratitude. We must say, as Rabbi Akiva told his disciples, everything that God does, He does for our good. Rabbi Akiva, he learned this dictum from his rabbi, Nahum Ish Gamzu, whose name actually came from approaching difficulties in life by saying a well-known expression, Gamzu Litova, literally, this as well is for my good. But what's the difference between Rabbi Akiva's expression, that everything God does is for the best, and his rabbi's expression, Gamzu Litova? Rabbi Akiva's expression, it deals with events that are engineered by Hashem. That everything that Hashem does, everything that He produces, that it is hakol tova. It is for our good. It's for our benefit. Where, when we look at the events that are outside of Hashem or events that we engineer, right? When we say gamzu tova, these are events that we have engineered. These are mistakes that we have created. So these are two unique expressions that deal with circumstances in our life that are either engineered by Hashem or engineered by our foolish mistakes. Because even in our mistakes, gamzu, likewise this will letova, will work out for my good. Now the expression gamzu letova, that's attributed to Rabbi Akiva's Rabbi Nachum Ish Gamzu, it came from a very fatal mistake that Nachum made. Over in Masechet Tanit, Chazal share a story about Nachum, that upon traveling, very similar to Rabbi Akiva traveling, Nachum was going to his father-in-law's house. And in his travels, Nachum stopped, and he had to adjust the straps of his chamor, his donkey. And while he was adjusting the straps, he was approached by a poor person who was asking for some bread. He was starving. And while he was willing to give the poor person some food, Nachum told the poor person just to, rega sheni, just hang on a second, right? Let me just finish adjusting the straps of my donkey, of my chomer here. Let me just adjust some things in my life. But after he adjusted the straps of his donkey, Nachum turned to give the person some bread, and he discovered the person fainted and died of hunger. Devastated that his preoccupation with the straps of his chamor, once again is symbolic of his chomer, led to the death of this oni, this poor person, which also symbolically represents his soul. Nachum then became afflicted with a rare skin disease, and he had his hands and feet amputated due to the disease. And so when people heard about what happened to Nachum, this is what he told them, going back to Tanit 21a. And he says, Banai, my sons, right? Not literal sons, but Banai, like his spiritual sons. And he says that, Ani gamarti le'atzmi, I brought it upon myself. And he says, Shepa'am, once upon a time, I was traveling along the road to my father-in-law's house. And he says, I had with me a load distributed among 3 donkeys, shalosha chomorim, right? Once again, they were like something, a luxury, like the ancient equivalent of a pickup truck. And he says that over here, that one had echad shel ma'achal, one was transporting food, v'echad shel mishteh, one was transporting drink, and the other had some nice delicacies, right? And he says afterwards, Ba'oni, a poor person came, v'amad li, and stood before me, v'derech, in the road. And he was saying, Rabbi, right, Rabbi, sustain me. I said to him, wait until I unload the donkey, after which I will give you something to eat. However, I had not mangled to unload the donkey before his soul left his body. It then goes on to say afterwards, and it says, Halachti v'nafalti el panav, I then went and fell on my face, and v'chamarti, I said, Enai shelo chasu el enecha, may my eyes which had no compassion on your eyes be blinded. May my hands which had no compassion on your hands be amputated. May my legs which had no compassion on your legs be amputated. And my mind did not rest until I said, may my whole body may be boiled kol gufi yehe malei shechin, in boils. And it says, Arulo, and it says, Nachum Gamzu prayed that his suffering might atone for his failure. And so his Talmidim, his students, said to him, even so, woe to us that we have seen you in this state. And he said to them, look at this, Oili, woe is me if you had not seen me in this state. As this suffering, he says, atones for me. And what? Gamzu letova. This too, this suffering is for the good. In this week's Torah portion, when we learn about the Chet HaEgel, we learn that the Chet HaEgel was not an event that was engineered by Hashem. Rather, it was engineered by Am Israel. And yes, I know it was the Erev, and we can debate about who was the Erev. They were non-Jews. They were Jews with bad intent. The point is, Hashem blamed the people. He says, these are your people, and we can say, yeah, the Erev was responsible for Moshe converting them, etc. But essentially, the entire people were held accountable. This is why there had to be another Bericha Chadashah, renewing of the covenant in the plains of Moab afterwards, in which we had curses added to the Torah. And essentially the renewal came with the concept of Aravut, accountability. Okay? And so we see here that this event was engineered by the people, not God. And even though the Chei HaEgel was engineered by the people, the Torah has come to teach us that, like the fatal mistake of Nahum, that the Chei HaEgel was also Gamzu L'Tovah. You might be saying, well, how is this possible? It is only from the depths of sin that one can experience the light of God's goodness. When Moshe told Hashem, Mechini na misifrecha, remove me, blot me from your book, Moshe was emulating Hashem for the sake of Shalom Bayit. Moshe was willing to have his name erased, just like Hashem would have his name erased when it came between a husband and his wife. Moshe's ability to emulate Hashem is much deeper than we understand. What do I mean? In psychology, there is a method called NLP, which means neuro-linguistic programming. That NLP teaches there is a connection between neurological processes, which is neuro, the N, language, linguistic, and behavioral patterns learned through experience or programming, P, NLP. And that these can be changed to achieve specific goals in life. And Sefer Tehillim, David HaMelech tells us that Hashem is our shadow. We read in Shir HaMalot, Psalm 121, verse 5, Hashem Shomrecha, Hashem Silchad Al Yad Yeminecha. Hashem is your guardian, your protector. He is your shadow above your right hand. Okay, what's that mean? The Torah tells us back in Parashat Bereshit, we were created B'Tselem Elokim. Many translations say in the image of God, but literally in the shadow of God. A shadow is a dark area where light from a light source is blocked by an opaque image. It occupies all of the three-dimensional volumes behind an object with light in front of it. And David says, Hashem Silchad Al Yad Yeminecha. Hashem is our shadow at our right hand. In other words, just as a shadow moves when the object moves, Hashem reciprocates to our movement, to our thoughts, to our actions. And so when Israel committed the Chei HaEgel, and Hashem was ready to destroy them for their foolish mistake, Moshe yelled out to Hashem, Machini na misifrecha. In other words, Moshe was like a psychologist. He used the method of NLP upon Hashem in order to get Hashem to change his decision to destroying Am Israel. And because Moshe was willing to be selfless before Hashem, Hashem was willing to be selfless to Israel for the Chei HaEgel. The lesson of Hashem Silcha is that the way we see Hashem is the way he sees us. And Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs, Shlomo said the well-known dictum, Ani ledodi v'dodi li. I am to my beloved, and my beloved is to me. In other words, the moment we die to Ani, the ego, to self, is the moment Hashem becomes dodi li, to us. Now we can understand the correlation of Tisa, the Truma. When Moshe pleaded with Hashem on behalf of Israel, what did he say? Going back to Exodus 32:32, Ve'ata in Tisa chatatam. And now if you would raise their sin. In other words, Moshe's ability to die to himself, to negate his ego, is what caused Hashem to lift the sin of Israel. And so we learned that even though our mistakes may have engineered events in life in which we have suffered, we've gone through trials and tribulations, we have to develop the attitude like Nahum. We have to say, Gamzu L'Tovah, that even this is for our good. Now in closing, I want us to understand the significance of what Moshe's name, or that when Moshe's name is mentioned, in reference to the Kelim, it's mentioned with the Kior, which, as I explained earlier, is related to Parashat Naso, where Hashem permits his name to be erased for the reconciliation of a husband and his wife. The Kior, once again, stood between the Ohel Moed and the Mizbeach. And what was it constructed of? It was constructed from bronze, but also with mirrors, which is very fascinating. The mirrors were donated by the women to assist in the building of the Mishkan. In fact, in the Targums to Shemot 38:8, when recording the construction of the Kior, Onkelos, in his translation, he actually mentions that I gotta see if I have it on here. I don't think I have it on the screen here, where I'll pull it up. But in Onkelos, the Aramaic translations, he translates the phrase, B'mar'ot hatzovot, which literally from Hebrew, it means mirrors of the legions or legions of mirrors, however you want to say it. He translates that phrase into Aramaic is, I'm trying to think off the top of my memory, B'mechziat Nishaya, which literally means with the mirrors of women. And so the Hebrew description in Exodus 38:8 is quite strange, because why did the Torah describe the construction of the Kior as B'mar'ot hasovot, from mirrors of the legions? In fact, I do have that passage on the screen here, Exodus 38:8. It reads, Vaya'az et hakior, nechoshet ve'et kano nechoshet b'mar'ot hasivot. He made the Kior of bronze and his base of bronze from the mirror allegiance, asher saveu petach ohel moed, who mass at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Now, the phrase here, b'mar'ot hasivaot, is explained in the Midrash as a reference to Israel. And the Midrash explains that while Israel was under oppression in Mitzrayim, that the women, the wives of the men, they used their mirrors to beautify themselves. Why? To entice their husbands to have intimate conjugal relations for the sake of procreation, because the men were depressed. They were pushed into the ghettos of society. They had to work triple, quadruple the amount of time to try to make a living. They were oppressed, essentially. And so, in order to try to lift their spirits, the women would try to beautify themselves with the little that they had. And so the Midrash mentions how Moshe initially took an issue with using such an object for the Mishkan, right? Hold on, we're going to use something that the women spent time in, beautifying themselves for, an act, a sacred act between a husband and wife, but it has its place in the bedroom, not in the Mishkan. And so Moshe couldn't understand, how could that be used for the Mishkan when it could be used for the Yetzer Hara? And so the Midrash Tachuma, the Parashat Pikudei, it deals with this in great detail. We'll read from here. It says, you will find that when Israel were subjugated with rigorous work in Mitzrayim, Paro decreed that they should not sleep in their homes, so that they could not engage in marital relations. And it says, Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta said, what did the daughters of Israel do? They went and drew water from the well, and the Holy One, blessed be He, prepared for them small fish, which is a reference or idiom to stimulate fertility, right? In their pitchers, which they would sell and cook. So in other words, the fish that was consumed, the omega-3s and everything, the zinc, it would help the fertility, like in the sperm, things of that nature. And it says they would sell and cook and buy some wine, not wind, with them. And they would go to the fields where they would feed their husbands. And as it says over here in Exodus 1:14, when it talks about Ucho Avodah Basadeh, and the work of the field, which Moshe saw the people laboring in. And so the Midrash then goes on to say that after they had ate and drank, they would take mirrors, okay? They would take the Hamerot. They would gaze in them with their husbands. And she would say to her husband, Omeret anina mincha, I'm more beautiful than you. And he would respond, well, listen, I'm much more handsome than you are, right? Anina mimech. And so during this time, they would become aroused. And then eventually they would have conjugal relations. The Holy One, blessed be, thereupon remember them and enable them to conceive. Midrash then goes on to say, Rabotenu Omerim, Chazal taught, some say that the women gave birth to twins, others say to sextuplets. So in other words, they were procreating at a super fast rate here. And then the Midrash goes on to say, in the merit, bezuchut otan, Hameraot, and the merit of those mirrors, which they show their husbands and stimulate them to arousal, despite the rigorous work, they establish all these multitudes, as it says in Exodus chapter 12, verse 41. All the multitudes of Hashem went out of the land of Mitzrayim. So why we find the word sevuot in the phrase there with the mirrors is it's talking about the legions of Israel. Okay? Kol ha-sevuot. Also, it says later on, Exodus 12, verse 51, Hashem took the children of Israel, Hotziyat Hashem et bnei Israel me'eretz Mitzrayim al sivotam, to their legions, their multitudes. Midrash goes on, it says, therefore, once the Holy One, blessed be He, told Moshe to make the Mishkan, all of Israel went ahead and contributed. Some brought silver, others brought gold or bronze, onyx stones, and the stones for the setting, like the avnei meulim, the breastplate and things of that nature. They brought everything expeditiously. The woman asks, what do we have to bring for a donation? What can we contribute it to the Mishkan? And so it says that they decided, they went to bring the Moshe, the mirrors, Vehivi'u et hamarot v'halechu lahen etzel Moshe. This is what they brought to Moses. And then the Midrash goes on to conclude. It says, when Moshe saw those mirrors, he became angry with them. And therefore, he amar lahem le'Israel, he said to Israel, take sticks and strike their thighs, right? Like, smack your woman up, man. Put some common sense in them. Oh, man, the feminist movement was back then. Moshe Rabbeinu was like old school. It's like body slam your wife for not making the food on time. I hope you guys understand I'm joking, by the way, in case there's a disgruntled listener out there. But anyway, yeah, Moshe was pretty old school in that sense, right? And he asked the question over here, what good are these mirrors? And then it says afterwards, Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He, said, Moshe el elu ata mevazeh. He says, are you degrading these? These mirrors are responsible for establishing these multitudes, the Jewish children of Mitzrayim. Take them and make out of them a wash basin, a kior for bronze, and a base, which would be for the Kohanim. For the Kohanim will purify themselves from it. As it says later here in Exodus chapter 38, verse 8, when it says, Vaya'as et hakiyor nechoshek ve'et kano nechoshek b'mar'ot hasove'ot asher saveu. He therefore made the kiyor of bronze from the mirrors of the women who had gathered. For it was those mirrors that had produced all of these multitudes, the legion of Israel. So Midrash Tachuma's story about the Kiyor contains two powerful lessons. Two. Why, of all the Kilim for the Mishkan, did Hashem choose the Kiyor to be made up of mirrors? Once again, the Torah tells us later in Parashat Naso that another function of the Kiyor, it was to validate the guilt or innocence of a sotah, a woman, a wife that was suspicious of committing infidelity. The Midrash in Bamidbar Rabbah tells us that Hashem chose the Kiyor in the matter of a sotah to testify about the woman's infidelity when it came to the women's lives in Mitzrayim, when it came to their husbands. We read here in Numbers, or Bamidbar Rabbah, the Midrash Numbers, 9:14. And it says here, from these mirrors which were not used for immorality, make the Kiyor with it. Their daughters will be tested to see if they are pure, teharot heim ki imotehen, as their mothers. Fascinating. Now the irony here is that the very essence of a mirror is appearance. Now this is interesting because in Hebrew, the word for mirror, as we saw earlier, is mar'ah. Mirror is spelled the same as the word for appearance. You just swap the nikudot, the vowel points. So mirror is mar'ah, appearance is mar'eh. A mirror, like water, which was in the Kiyor, seems to reflect reality. However, it's only an illusion. What it shows is only a surface image. Just as a mirror does not truly reflect reality, it just shows a surface. Likewise, any appearance is not necessarily reality, and therefore we cannot judge by it. Therefore, Moshe judging the mirrors by their appearance was a contradiction in terms. And so when we understand the concept of a mirror reflecting reality, we learned that in relation to the Kohanim who will wash their hands in the Kior prior to engaging in Avodat Hashem, that the Kior function as a spiritual mirror for the Kohanim. What do I mean, a spiritual mirror? I don't have the quote on the screen, but in Masechet Kiddushin, Chazal made an interesting statement that goes along the lines of Kol haposel b'mumo posel, which roughly means whoever claims that another person is flawed themselves. In other words, the very thing you see in somebody else is a reflection of something negative in you. And so in relation to the practice of what we do today, netilat yadayim, washing hands when we wake up or before we perform a mitzvah, like a meal of some sorts, we're required to stop and to contemplate before we engage in Avodat Hashem. When it comes to Avodat Hashem, we must be careful with how we perceive ourselves. Netilat Yadayim is a deeper symbolism that teaches us that Hashem himself acts as a mirror to reflect back our lives, to show us where we have strayed. What happens on the outside is nothing but a reflection of what's happening on the inside. And so the problem is, if we fail to see the inside reality, we will be deceived into seeing the illusions of an outside fallacy. When you forget where you are and who you are, and especially who you're supposed to be, you then act out the dark side of your soul. To really see where you are and who you are supposed to be, you must look at your soul through the eyes of Hashem. This is why David HaMelech said that the person who can draw near to Hashem is the one who, and it's in Psalm 24, Niki Kapayim Uvar Levav, is the one who has clean hands and a pure heart. This is also why we read that the Kior is stood between the Ohel Moed and the Mizbeach. That's not a coincidence, because if one desires to encounter Hashem, it's going to depend upon her level of sacrifice. And I don't have it on the screen, but the word Mizbeach, what we translate as altar, comes from the root word Zavach, which means to slaughter. One is supposed to slaughter their inner nature, their Yetzer Hara, their ego. So a large part of Netilat Yadayim, which is based upon the practice of the Kohanim washing their hands and feet in the temple, is learning to slaughter the unkosher attributes from our ego, removing the things that are not pleasing to Hashem. Rabbi Menachem ben Benjamin of Rachante, Italy, who's also known as Rachante, he taught in his commentary to this week's Parashat, I don't have the quote on the screen, that when it came to the korbanot, the Kohen would gaze into the face of the sinner to effect the sacrificial atonement by healing the sinner's soul. And the Rachante explained that when the sinner would bring their korban to the Mizbeach, they would see the reflection in the waters of the Kior, and upon seeing the reflection, they would see their inner self. The Kohen who officiated the korbanot was symbolic of a Siddiq. He was supposed to be a mirror who reflected back to the sinner what they were supposed to look like, what their potential could be. And this is a powerful insight, because how do we apply this principle today when we don't have a Kior? We no longer have a Kohen Hagadol. We don't have a Beit HaMikdash or a Mishkan. And so I found a very, very fascinating quote from the Piasential Rebbe, Rabbi Kalomis Kalman Shapiro, Zechron Livracha, who perished in the Shoah. And he said this: if you can't find a Siddiq in your vicinity, look for the Siddiq's reflection. Look for his books, look for his students, since they are his reflections. They bear his essence of self. And so the moral of the story, as we come to an end here for this teaching on Parashat Tisa, is that we need to search out the proper reflection of what we're supposed to look like. And we find that through a spiritual mentor, a teacher, a leader, whether that's somebody that's physically alive today or whether it's through the books that they have left us. And we learn from them. And we learn to challenge and change ourselves. We undergo a korban chaya, a living sacrifice within, for the sake of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And so with that said, Chavarina, is going to bring me to a close here for my teaching on Parashat Tisa, which once again I labeled everything is for the good. And that means that everything that happens to us, even for events that we have engineered, you have to trust Hashem that everything is for the good. That's why when we look at the teaching of others who have come before us, their story, their life has stories of ups and downs that we can learn from. And that means whether the events are engineered by Hashem or engineered by us, everything is for the good. Everything works out for the glory of God. And so if our organization is has blessed you in any way, shape, or form, and you'd like to donate, you can find a link to donate directly below in the video's description. We thank everybody for their financial support and your prayers as well. And also, if you have questions pertaining to the teaching, you want to send me an email, please send an email. I do answer those in the order that they arrive in. And also, as a reminder, as I mentioned at the beginning of the teaching, if you want to take advantage of the special Pesach teaching, once again, this teaching is designed for individuals who come from Christian/Messianic backgrounds, who are still dealing with the subjects like the Passover lamb and want a proper kosher understanding of it. It does not advocate, by the way, that Yeshua Notzri is the Passover lamb that takes away your sin. This actually teaches against that concept and teaches it in context to what the Torah teaches. Anyone who provides a $150 donation is able to get access to the live class. We will be having it once again Motzi Shabbat, March 29th, also going into Sunday, March 30th. You can scan the QR code there. You can go to the link. You can email us for more questions. And once again, we have source material for every one of those who have taken part of it before. Was able to get access to the book that I put together. I have more subject matter that I actually built on top of what I released before, going a little bit more detail on this. So once again, take advantage of that if it's something you're interested in. Until next time, Chavarim, may the God of Avraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov bless you and your family. Shalom and Kol Tov.